Minister.
Mr Speaker, this government have taken a broad set of measures to protect jobs in Wales and right across the UK during the COVID-19 outbreak. We've shown flexibility, most recently by extending the furlough scheme until the end of March.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To what extent have jobs and livelihoods in Wales been protected by the government's financial support through the Chancellor's furlough and self-employed schemes and business grants and loans? And are there other ways that the Welsh Senedd has been supported by the UK government?
The short answer, Mr Speaker, is that they've been protected to an absolutely enormous extent as a result of measures brought forward by the UK government. Over 400,000 people in Wales have benefited from the furlough scheme. £2 billion worth of financial support has been provided for the UK government's self-employed income support scheme, and £5 billion extra has been given to the Welsh Government. Not all of that money has yet been spent, so there is plenty more that the Welsh Government can be doing to support businesses and jobs in Wales.
Deirdre Brown.
Question 12, Mr Speaker. Thank you.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State for Wales and I have regular discussions with ministerial colleagues and Welsh ministers on a range of issues, including EU trade negotiations. The Joint Ministerial Committee on EU negotiations meets regularly, and my ministerial colleagues frequently discuss the EU trade negotiations with ministers from all of the devolved administrations.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The comments by the DEFRA Secretary on Sunday that sheep farmers should just switch over to beef in the face of higher tariffs have been widely ridiculed in Wales and indeed in Scotland. Quite a let-them-eat-cake moment. Lamb exports are vital, not only for farmers but wider rural communities. What confidence can hill farmers have that the British government has their interests at heart when it comes to EU trade negotiations after such a ministerial blunder?
Well, first of all, Mr Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Lady that this government is working very hard indeed to ensure that we get a full trade deal with the European Union. The second point to remember is that the Honourable Lady's party have voted against every single trade deal or abstained on it that's been put forward for the last 15 years. The third point that I would like to put to her is that this government, UK government, have already shown over and again how much support they will give to any industry that gets into any kind of trouble as a result of COVID or indeed as a result of anything else. So the Honourable Lady can rest assured that we're doing everything possible. And if she is worried, perhaps she'd like to explain to her constituents why she and her party voted against a deal that would have kept us inside a customs union and a single market. I voted for it. She and her party rejected that.
Speaker, I know the Minister is a strong supporter of devolution, and he'll acknowledge that the UK government's conduct of reserved matters such as trade will have significant implications for devolved competencies such as agriculture. With that in mind, can I ask what concrete steps the government is taking to develop the capacity of the Joint Ministerial Committee so that it fosters greater trust and transparency between the four nations?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has been quite kind to me because, of course, I was on a slightly different side of the argument in 1999. But I have reformed, Mr Speaker. I am a changed man. I recognise, of course, that the people of Wales voted twice for devolution in referendums, and I believe that when the people of Wales vote for something in a referendum, that choice needs to be respected. So I respect devolution, I will support devolution, and I welcome the suggestion that the Honourable Gentleman is making of closer cooperation between the UK and Welsh Government over important issues such as agriculture.
We have a substantive question to Secretary Hart. Substantive question 14.
Sorry, Mr Speaker, fast asleep. I've had constructive discussions with representative bodies, including WIU and Football Association Wales. These discussions will prove instrumental in allowing teams to get back on the pitch.
We're now going over to Dublin with Rob Roberts. Rob Roberts.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr Speaker. On a recent trip to Flint Town United in my constituency, who was successfully promoted to the Welsh Premier League last year, the chairman was telling me they only need 15 to 20% of their ground capacity to be allowed in to watch matches in order to cover costs and keep their heads above water. They've done a lot to enable a small number of supporters to return in a COVID-secure way. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that getting supporters back into grounds in a safe and secure way is the best way to make sure we don't lose clubs in Wales which provide vital recreation services for all ages and also act as a focal point for the local community.
My old friend makes a very good point, and I absolutely agree with him. It's actually also a good moment to congratulate, I think, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney for their recent purchase of Wrexham Football Club. What an exciting future they have, no doubt. But his point is a good one. Of course, what we want to see is a successful vaccination programme, a successful testing programme. That will help in his ambitions, but also some funding from National Lottery and some funding from Welsh Government will ease the way to returns to complete and capacity stadiums of the sort that he wishes.
Tony Antonliazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 10th of November, the difficult decision was taken to cancel the remaining games of the Women's Rugby Six Nations Competition 2020 due to the impact of coronavirus. Now, while we live in unprecedented times, what assurances can the Secretary of State give that international women's sport will be given the same priority as the men's, and what message does he think this gives to women and girls' sport in Wales?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady is probably the only person in the Chamber who's represented a sport at national and international level, so I take her question very seriously in that regard. Of course, there should be no disparity between the sports that she refers to, and I absolutely am with her and link arms with her in our determination to make sure that isn't the case, and that we get back to sport of all different sorts as soon as possible, as safely as possible, and we will work with her and others to make sure that is the case.
Dr. James Davis.
Speaker, although football matches are being played again, this is behind closed doors and there's no associated match day income. So will my right honourable friend encourage Sport Wales and the FUW to work together to ensure that clubs such as Rill in my constituency receive the support they need at this really difficult time?
My Honourable, it would be remiss of me not to also give a substantial name check to Rill, having obviously given one to Wrexham. That would seem unfair. I agree with his position on the basis of his question. As I say, National League funding in England has come up with some significant funds that should be replicated in Wales, and anything we can do to get money channelled into the sport to see it through this difficult time, we certainly will be doing.
We have a substantive question to the Secretary of State. Question 17, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On top of the £5 billion guarantee given to Welsh Government, we have provided an additional £1.96 billion in direct support to businesses in Wales and protected over 400,000 Welsh jobs. We've also extended the £1 million annual investment allowance to stimulate investment in UK manufacturing.
Let's head up to Merseyside with Margaret Greenwood. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several of my constituents work at the Airbus plant in Broughton in North Wales. In July, it was announced that more than 1,400 jobs would be cut there, and earlier this month, we heard that there could be more than 400 compulsory redundancies. This is a time of immense uncertainty for the aerospace sector. So what action is the Minister taking to work with the Welsh Government and the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to make sure that the jobs of my constituents are secure?
Okay.
Honourable Lady very appropriately points out the fact that the effect of coronavirus on Airbus has got a cross-border implication, and I'm very aware of that. That's why we're working together with the Secretary of State for BEIS, with Welsh Government, with other stakeholders, and in particular with Airbus, who have been incredibly cooperative and forward-looking. And I would like to think also very grateful for the support that has already been given by the Chancellor to the industry and to Airbus in particular. What the plan is, obviously, is to make sure there's a future for Airbus at Broughton, not just over the next few months, but the next few years too. So all of the planning which has gone into this is about a sustainable business over a long period of time, in addition to seeing people through this immediate period with the most limited amount of hardship that we can achieve.
We have a substantive question to the Secretary of State. Question 18, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government has been working closely with the Welsh Government and indeed all three devolved administrations to tackle COVID-19. We have had numerous meetings. In fact, we stopped counting at 200 because it seemed that they were becoming almost so numerous as to be impossible to record. So the cooperation has been substantial.
Heading over to Romford with Andrew Rosendale. Andrew Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the Secretary of State will agree that it is essential that any new coronavirus vaccine is both safe and effective and rolled out as quickly as possible in Wales and across the UK so that we can put an end to these disastrous lockdown policies and get back to normal. So what discussions will the Secretary of State have with Welsh ministers on coordinating national vaccine supply chains and a UK-wide vaccination rollout strategy?
Mr Speaker, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, the importance of an equitable spread of vaccination across the UK is absolutely essential. That's why we're having regular meetings, daily meetings at official and ministerial level with Welsh Government and others to make sure that that is achieved. And as an addition to that, I can say that things like the testing regime, which has been announced in Merthyr Tydfil, County Merthyr Tydfil today, which involves 156 or 165, I think, in fact, military personnel provided by UK Government, is an indication of how we are determined to act collaboratively in dealing with this disease.
Question 19, please. Well, Mr Speaker, I know how committed the Honourable Gentleman is to steel making from our time on the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. Can I reassure him that the UK Government is similarly committed to a long-term, sustainable future for steel making in Wales? We've already met with Tata, the Welsh Government, and Bays will continue to work with the company as it shapes its business strategy in the future.
Stephen Kinnock.
The Minister will be concerned by the recent news of Tata Steel selling its Dutch operations to a Swedish company. The steel industry is helping so much in this current crisis, and it is the basis of our entire manufacturing sector. So can the Minister please just give a bit more detail about what discussions are taking place with government, with Tata Steel, and when can we hear some positive good news, because we need our steel industry?
Well, Mr Speaker, I agree with the basis of the Honourable Gentleman's question. I can't go into great detail about what discussions are taking place, but I can reassure him that discussions have taken place with Tata and with Bays, and that the UK Government stands ready to work with all to ensure that we have that steel-making future in Wales. And if the Honourable Gentleman has any doubt at all, he only needs to look at the work my right honourable friend did to ensure that CELSA received a £30 million loan, a loan that has saved 800 jobs in Wales and demonstrates firmly our commitment to the Welsh steelmaking industry.
We now go to questions to the Prime Minister. The questions to the Prime Minister, I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question. I will then call Anna McMorran to ask her supplementary. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know that you've been updated by my officials on Privy Council terms on the leak investigation that you also referred to in the House on the 2nd of November. As you know, Mr Speaker, I take this matter extremely seriously and I commit to returning to update the House in due course. Mr Speaker, this morning I had virtual meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my virtual duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Anna McMorran.
Thank you. This pandemic has shown how interconnected and vulnerable we are to global challenges. When we're still grappling with COVID, the climate emergency, growing hunger, why is this government reported to be breaking its own manifesto commitment and cutting the aid budget, which saves lives and builds resilience? So will the Prime Minister stop this retreat from the global stage and take this opportunity to rule that out here and now?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can tell the Honourable Lady, I think everybody in this country can be immensely proud of the massive commitments that this country has made and will continue to make to tackling poverty and deprivation around the world. But I think they can be even prouder of the commitment that we are now making, leading the world to tackle the threat of of climate change. And the investment we're making, whether through ODA or other means in tackling that problem, is second to none across the world. It is the UK that is leading the world in tackling, I think, one of the gravest problems that this planet faces.
Returning to Romford with Andrew Rosendale. Andrew Rosendale. Press the button, Andrew.
Right, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that my constituents in Romford have put up with a dangerous junction and flyover at Gallows Corner, which was meant to be only a temporary structure, but has been there for 50 years. The Prime Minister has been there with me when he was Mayor of London. So as part of this government's plans to build back better, will the Prime Minister commit today to stepping in where Sadiq Khan has failed, bankrupting TfL by the tune of 10 billion, and guarantee the necessary funding to replace and reshape this junction, especially as it will form a major route to and from the new Lower Thames crossing?
We go back to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that it's the current Labour Mayor of London who blew TfL's finances, which were left in remarkably good condition by the previous Mayor of London, Mr. Speaker, even before the pandemic struck. And I can assure my honourable friend that TfL, we are working with TfL, Department of Transport will be working with TfL to see what we can do to resolve the problem at Gallows Corner that he mentions, and we will, of course, update him in due course.
We now go to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by sending my best wishes to the Prime Minister and all those across the country who are doing the right thing by following the rules and self-isolating. Mr. Speaker, devolution in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. Until now, whatever our disagreements, there's been a very broad consensus about devolution. So why did the Prime Minister tell his MPs this week that Scottish devolution is, in his words, a disaster?
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what has unquestionably been a disaster is the way in which the Scottish Nationalist Party have taken and used devolution as a means not to improve the lives of their constituents, not to address their health concerns, not to improve education in Scotland, but constantly, and I know this is actually a point of view that is shared by the Right Honourable Gentleman who leads for the opposition, but constantly to campaign for the breakup of our country and to turn devolution, otherwise a sound policy from which I myself personally benefited by when I was running London, but turn devolution into a mission to break up the UK. And that, in my view, would be a disaster. If he doesn't think that would be a disaster, then perhaps he could say so now.
Could I just say it's the Scottish National Party, not the Nationalist Party? Otherwise, the phones will be ringing longer than...
I'm so sorry. They're national but not nationalists, I see. Right.
We can play pedantics another time. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the biggest threat to the future of the United Kingdom is the Prime Minister every time he opens his mouth on this. When the Prime Minister said he wanted to take back control, nobody thought he meant from the Scottish people. But the Prime Minister's quote is very clear. He said devolution has been a disaster north of the border. This isn't an isolated incident. Whether it's the internal market bill, the way the Prime Minister sidelined the devolved parliaments over the COVID response, the Prime Minister is seriously undermining the fabric of the United Kingdom. So instead of talking down devolution, does he agree that we need far greater devolution of powers and resources across the United Kingdom?
We now go back. Well, Prime Minister.
I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think it's Tony Blair himself, the former Labour leader, who has conceded that he did not foresee the rise of a separatist party in Scotland. He did not foresee the collapse of Scottish Labour. Mr. Speaker. And I think the right honourable gentleman is quite right. There can be great advantages in devolution. And I was very proud when I was running a devolved administration in London to do things in which I passionately believed, like improving public transport and fighting crime and improving housing for my constituents. And we had a great deal of success. And what disappoints me is that the Scottish National Party, Mr. Speaker, by your ruling on their correct name, the Scottish National Party, Mr. Speaker, is not engaging in that basic work. Instead, they are campaigning to break up the union, an objective that I hope the Leader of the Opposition will repudiate. Will he say so now that he opposes the break-up of the United Kingdom?
It's not a ruling, it's a matter of fact. Kirsten.
Of course I don't want the break-up of the Union, the United Kingdom, but if anything is fuelling that break-up, it's the Prime Minister. Turning now to the Prime Minister's handling of the pandemic, the Prime Minister is doing the right thing by self-isolating after being notified by Track and Trace. But does he think he would have been able to do so if, like so many other people across the country, all he had to rely on for the next 14 days was either statutory sick pay, which is £95 a week, that's £13 a day, or a one-off payment of £500, which works out at £35 a day?
Prime Minister.
Well, it's good finally to hear something from the right honourable gentleman in praise of NHS test and trace. I think they secured at least one of his objectives, which is keep me away from answering his questions in person. What I can say to him is that I believe that the package that we have in place to protect people and support people throughout this crisis has been outstanding and exceptional. I think that the UK has put its arms, as I've said many times, around the people of this country, a £200 billion package of support, increasing the living wage by record amounts, uplifting universal credit, many loans and grants to businesses of all kinds, and support for people who are self-isolating, £500 of support in addition to all the other benefits and support that we give. I do think it's a reasonable package, Mr. Speaker. I know it's tough for people who have to self-isolate, and I'm glad that after a long time in which he simply attacked NHS test and trace, he seems now to be coming around and supporting it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures on supporting. The lockdown measures were passed the other week with Labour votes. 32 of his own MPs broke a three-line whip. And I hear that about 50 of them have joined a WhatsApp group to work out how they're going to oppose him next time round. He should be thanking us for our support, not criticising. And as he well knows, so far as the £500 scheme is concerned, only 1 in 8 workers qualifies for that scheme. The Prime Minister always does this, talking about the number of people he's helping, but ignoring the huge numbers falling through the gap. Members here may be able to afford to self-isolate, but that's not the case for many people across the country who send us here. It's estimated that only about 11% of people self-isolate when they're asked to do so. 11%. That isn't because they don't want to. It's because many don't feel that they can afford to. So, for example, if you're a self-employed plumber, a construction worker, a photographer, and you don't qualify for social security benefits, or you run a small business and you can't work from home, you're likely to see a significant cut to your income if you have to self-isolate. This is affecting many families across the country. Does the Prime Minister recognise that if we want to increase the number of people who isolate, we need to make it easier and affordable for people to do so?
Going back to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, again, I do think that it is extraordinary that he's now coming out in favour of NHS test and trace when he's continuously attacked it. In fact, the numbers that he gives for the success rate of NHS of the self-isolation programme are, according to my information, way too low. But we continue to encourage people to do the right thing. It does break the chain of transmission of the disease. And as for the self-employed groups that he mentions, we've given £13.5 billion so far in support for self-employed people, uplifted universal credit in the way that I have described. And what we want to do is to get the virus under control, get the R down below 1, which is the purpose of these current measures, encourage people to self-isolate in the way that, that I am, thereby stop the disease from spreading, so that the firms, the professions, the businesses that he talks about can get back to to something as close to normality as soon as possible. In the meantime, we are giving them every possible support, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must understand there's a huge gap in the system, because if you can't afford to isolate, there's little point in being tested or traced. And whilst the Prime Minister and Chancellor won't pay people enough to isolate properly, we learnt this week that they can find £21 million of taxpayers' money to pay a go-between to deliver lucrative contracts to the Department of Health. £21 million. I remind the Prime Minister that a few weeks ago he couldn't find that amount of money for free school meals for kids over half-term. Does the Prime Minister think that £21 million to a middleman was an acceptable use of taxpayers' money?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when this crisis began, we were being urged by the Right Honourable Gentleman to remove the blockages in our procurement process in order to get PPE. And we were facing, as he will remember, a very difficult situation where across the world there were not adequate supplies of PPE. Nobody had enough PPE. We shifted heaven and earth to get 32 billion items of PPE into this country. I'm very proud of what has been achieved. 70% of PPE is now made in this country, or capable of being made in this country, when it was only 1% at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's entirely typical, I may say, of Captain Hindsight, that he now attacks our efforts to procure PPE, says we went too fast. When he now says that says then that we were not going fast enough, and now says that we went too fast. He should make his mind up.
Keir Starmer.
He talks about hindsight. I say catch up. I called for a circuit breaker. The Prime Minister stood there and said it'd be a disaster. He wasn't going to do it. Then he caught up and did exactly that just a few weeks later. We've now got a longer, harder lockdown as a result of his delay, so I won't take that from him. Last week, the Prime Minister couldn't explain how his government ended up paying £150 million on contracts that didn't deliver a single piece of usable PPE. This week, he's effectively defending the paying of £21 million on a contract with no oversight. This morning, the Independent National Audit Office concluded that the government's approach was, in their words, diminished public transparency. They reported that more than half of all contracts relating to the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, that's totalling £10.5 billion, were handed out without competitive tender, and that suppliers with political connections were 10 times more likely to be awarded contracts. Mr. Speaker, we're 8 months into this crisis, and the government is still making the same mistakes. Can the Prime Minister give a cast-iron assurance that from now on, all government contracts will be subject to proper process with full transparency and accountability?
Mr. Speaker, all government contracts are, of course, going to be published in a due way and are already being published. But again, I must say, I think it's extraordinary that he now attacks the government for securing PPE in huge quantities. And I want to thank again all the people who are involved in that effort, Lord Dighton and literally thousands of others who built up a mountain of PPE against any further crisis. And he talks about transparency and moving too fast to secure contracts. As you should know, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster actually wrote to the government attacking us for failing to approach various companies, including a football agent who was apparently offering to supply ventilators, and a historical clothing manufacturing company who's offering to make 175 gowns per week, and whose current range includes 16th century silk bodices. Again, Mr. Speaker, at the time he bashed the government for not moving fast enough. It's absolutely absurd that Captain Hindsight is now once again trying to score political points by attacking us for moving too fast. I'm proud of what we did to secure huge quantities of PPE during a pandemic. Any government would do the same.
Prime Minister, we're now going to Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Speaker. I feel like a positive rose between two negative thorns today. I'm sure my right honourable friend is aware of recent successes that Lincoln City Football Club, the pride of my constituency, have enjoyed. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has hit football hard, especially those clubs dependent on cricket sales. Can my right honourable friend urge his Cabinet colleagues to review grant funding for football clubs, maybe outlining how we can return fans to matches at all levels of the game, as I have requested in previous correspondence? And as it has been a while since the Prime Minister visited Lincoln, would he care to join me at an Imps match when we can return in person as fans of the beautiful game?
Prime Minister.
Friend, very much, and I can tell him that we don't want any football team to go out of business as a result of this pandemic, and we're doing everything we can. I understand the frustration of fans, and we want to get crowds back into the ground as soon as possible. As for his invitation to come and watch the Imps, I will do whatever I can to oblige as soon as possible. I bear his invitation in mind.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Mr Speaker, and can I wish the Prime Minister and all those that are self-isolating well. Mr Speaker, over the past 20 years, Westminster has imposed an extreme Brexit, an illegal war in Iraq, £9,000 tuition fees, the Windrush scandal, the rape clause, the bedroom tax, and a decade of Tory austerity cuts which have pushed millions into poverty. At the same time, the Scottish Parliament has delivered free prescriptions, free tuition fees, free personal care, free bus travel, the baby box, the Scottish Child Payment, world-leading climate action, all of which make Scotland a fairer and more equal place to live. Does the Prime Minister understand why the people in Scotland think it is him and his Parliament that are the real disaster?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I respectfully refer the right honourable gentleman to the answer I gave to the Leader of the Opposition. I may say that I do think that his policies of wanting to break up the Union are a disaster, and I wish he and his party would focus on the real priorities of the people of Scotland, on education, on health, on tackling crime and housing and the issues that matter to all our people. That's what a devolved government should do. I was very proud to run a devolved administration, and that's what we focused on. We didn't endlessly go on about constitutional change and the breakup of the UK.
In Blackford.
My goodness, I'm not sure if the Prime Minister was listening, because I just charted some of the achievements of the Scottish Government delivering on behalf of the people of Scotland. Mr Speaker, no apology and no regrets from this Prime Minister. His attack on devolution wasn't just a slip of a tongue, it was a slip of the Tory mask. The chasm between Westminster and the Scottish people has never been bigger. We know that these were not just flippant remarks when Scotland faces the biggest threat to devolution with the Tory power grab bill. The fact is, Scotland has been completely ignored by Westminster. We now face an extreme Brexit, a power grab, and another round of Tory cuts, all being imposed against our will by a Tory government that we didn't vote for. Exactly. Isn't it the case, Mr Speaker, that the real disaster facing the people of Scotland is another 20 years of Westminster government? Isn't it clearer than ever that the only way, Mr Speaker, to protect Scotland's interests, our Parliament and our place in Europe, is for Scotland to become an independent country?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, I could not disagree with the Honourable Gentleman more. He is totally wrong. What the UK does as a whole is far, far bigger, better and more important than what we can do as individual nations and regions. And I think that actually when you look at the way the UK has pulled together during this pandemic, the way the armed services have worked to get testing throughout the whole of the UK, the way that the furlough scheme has been deployed across the UK, the billions and billions that have been found to help people across the whole of the UK, businesses in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, in England. I think that the UK has shown its value and will continue to show its value, Mr Speaker. And when he talks about wanting to take Scotland back into the European Union, which I think seemed to be what he was saying just now, what he should understand, what the people of Scotland should understand, is that is a massive surrender of power by the people of Scotland straight back to Brussels, just as this country, just as the people of Scotland have taken it back again. And power not just over many aspects of of their lives and their regulations, but of course power to control Scottish fisheries as well. And all that would be lost under his programme, and I may say I do not believe it will commend itself to the Scottish people. It was a programme that was decisively rejected in 2014. I believe that it is something that they would almost certainly reject again, Mr. Speaker. But as he said before, or as certainly as his party said before,
Sir Graham Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tens of thousands of jobs have already been lost in aviation, and hundreds of thousands more hang in the balance. Will my right honourable friend throw the industry a lifeline by making sure that the government task force reports in time for a testing regime to replace the current quarantine arrangements as we come out of this lockdown on the 3rd of December?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're certainly working very fast to see if we can replace the current quarantine arrangements for every category of self-isolation. Whether it will come fast enough for me, I don't know, but I'll keep my right honourable friend informed of developments. We certainly want to help the airline industry.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Northern Ireland today will see again the benefits of the Union, with £165 million invested in rural broadband across Northern Ireland, the result of our agreement with the government during the last Parliament. Mr. Speaker, following on from the current population testing initiative in Liverpool, would the Prime Minister agree that Northern Ireland's 1.8 million population, spread across 11 local government districts, would prove ideal for the next phase of the government's ongoing programme of work on large-scale COVID testing?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his excellent proposal, and he's right that mass testing of that kind is a very powerful weapon in the fight against COVID, and we'll certainly be talking to the Northern Ireland Executive about how to proceed.
Gareth Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, I've been contacted by many constituents who are owners of leasehold flats in buildings under 18 metres in height, which are covered in cladding, and the freeholder has not replaced that cladding or produced an EWS1 form. Some of these residents are desperate to move but can't because their flats are effectively valueless without the form. Can the Prime Minister update the House on what progress is being made by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and the National Fire Chiefs Council to develop the urgently needed risk prioritisation matrix so that my constituents can move on with their lives?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have deep sympathies with people who face this problem, and it is not right or fair, because if your building is under 18 metres, you don't need one of these EWS1 forms, and you would hope the lenders would understand that. But we're working as fast as we can to make sure that all the buildings in question are identified, and that we remove cladding wherever it's necessary, and give assurance and security wherever that is necessary too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government plans to scrap the Union Learning Fund means that thousands of workers, around 200,000 a year, many of them low paid, will miss out on training opportunities. With unemployment levels rising, will the Prime Minister today act on his commitment to offer a lifetime skills guarantee to help people train and retrain at any stage in their lives, and reverse this decision to ensure working people can access education, training and skills for the future?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we announced only a few weeks ago with the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. The purpose of the Lifetime Skills Guarantee is to make sure that if you're over 23, you're currently not eligible for support from the government in getting a new skill or a new qualification, we will now pay you for that skill. We'll support you. We want people, particularly in the context of this pandemic, we want to help train and retrain people throughout their lives so that they can adjust to our changing economy. She's making a very good point.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to truly level up constituencies like mine in Lincolnshire, we will need to mobilise billions of private capital to help us pay for new infrastructure investment. Will the Prime Minister consider launching a new financial institution, such as a national development bank, to help achieve this?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for what he's doing to campaign for Grantham and Stanford for Lincolnshire, and I can tell him that we're putting another 155 million into Greater Lincolnshire through the growth deals, another 25 million through the Getting Building Fund, and we will be bringing forward further measures, and I take his point on board very sincerely. We'll bring forward further measures to boost investment in UK infrastructure in due course.
We're going up to Ealing North with James Murray. James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, in March, the Government Chief Scientific Officer said that keeping COVID deaths below 20,000 would be a good outcome, but still an enormous number of deaths. We've now passed 50,000 deaths and suffered the deepest recession of any G7 country, with GDP dropping by 10% in the last year. Why does the Prime Minister think the UK has had the deepest recession in the G7 and the highest number of COVID deaths in Europe?
Minister.
A global pandemic, and one in which the UK has, as he rightly says, been badly affected, and we mourn every life that has been lost. And of course, we're supporting businesses with all the and individuals with all the firepower of the UK economy. But I've got absolutely no doubt that we will get through this strongly by next spring, as the scientific advisors and the nodal officers have said. We have the tools to do it. We have the scientific weaponry to do it. And that is why we're engaged in the current restrictions to get the R down, to suppress the virus now, and to try to get the economy moving in the way that I'm sure he would like.
Mark Porsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most of our fabulous independent retailers in Rugby are currently closed due to COVID restrictions, and while they appreciate the very welcome financial support provided by the government, they're concerned that supermarkets and multiple retailers continue to sell the same products as them, homeware and clothing. This has enabled them to generate substantial profits, whilst at the same time they've had a holiday on the payment of business rates. I wonder whether the Prime Minister would agree with me that there should be fairness between retailers, and with the government spending £200 billion to support businesses and people in these very tough times, it would be a welcome gesture from multiples who continue to trade to volunteer to pay their business rate.
Well, I understand the point that he makes, and the feeling of unfairness that he describes, and what we're trying to do, with the business rate holiday and all the other measures that we've announced, is to help all retailers. And the best thing we can do is to get through this tough period as well as we possibly can, and allow all retailers to reopen and to give them our support with our customers. That's what we're aiming for.
We're now going up to Scotland with an audio-only Margaret Farrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent applied for the EU settlement scheme in September 2019 for her and her son. 15 months on, and she's still waiting for a decision on her application. With the end of the transition period just a few short weeks away, will the Prime Minister give a cast-iron guarantee that my constituent's application and all other outstanding applications to the scheme will be concluded before the 31st of December 2020?
Prime Minister.
Lady, Mr. Speaker, and I understand that the case is now under urgent review, and that a decision will be made shortly.
Damien Collins.
It's fantastic that we will very soon have the COVID vaccine, but extremely concerning that in a recent survey, 1 in 5 people say they won't take it. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that social media companies should be doing more to remove anti-vaccine disinformation and conspiracy theories? And will he consider including requirements to do that within the scope of the government's forthcoming online harms bill?
Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, I'm very pleased that Facebook, Twitter and Google have committed that no company should profit from or promote vaccine disinformation, and to respond to that kind of content very quickly. And we are going to be publishing our response shortly to the online harms white paper consultation. and we'll be setting out our plans for legislation.
John Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Child poverty is evil. I know, I grew up with it. The North East Child Poverty Commission reports that our region suffered the country's biggest increase in child poverty between 2015 and 2019, when half of children in Newcastle Central were growing up poor, and that's before COVID. And yet 15,000 of the poorest households in my constituency stand to lose £1,000 a year because of planned cuts to universal credit in April. So instead of damaging last-minute U-turns, will the Prime Minister now commit to maintaining universal credit at least the current rate?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's right in what she says about the impact of child poverty, and that's why this government has worked so hard to combat child poverty, and that's why we did indeed uprate universal credit, as was right for the exceptional circumstances that were in, over £1,000 per household, and we will continue to support people throughout this country. But the most important thing we can do is to ensure that we get people into work and to support families to get the jobs that they need. And it's the record of this country in creating jobs and new jobs in particular that has meant actually that 400,000 children have been lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years. And that is something, that is progress. It's not enough, but it's progress.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, more than 1 million fellow citizens have recovered after testing positive for COVID-19. On the 2nd of November, the British Medical Journal reported that all those people will have protection from their T cells, which will ensure that they cannot be reinfected for at least 6 months. In the light of that, will my right honourable friend follow the example of Sweden and exempt from all the COVID regulations those people who have tested positive within the last 6 months, and thereby show that he is following the science and also common sense?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for going through his very well-meant suggestion, and very kind. But you know, there's evidence both ways on that, and I think that what everybody would expect is that everybody who does get pinged, everybody who does get contacted by NHS Test and Trace should follow the rules.
Said to Bedford with Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 6 out of 10 people who have died by COVID-19 are disabled. Yet during this pandemic, disabled people have seen their care cut back, struggle to isolate without sufficient support, and been excluded from the government's shambolic communications. As we start Disability History Month, will the Prime Minister tell the House why disabled people have been so let down by his government?
Mr.
Grateful for the question, and I'm grateful for the campaigning that the honourable gentleman does on behalf of the disabled. But I must reject what he says, because we have done everything we can to reach out to disabled and vulnerable groups of all kinds, to give them all the advice that we think is necessary, and all the support that we possibly can throughout this pandemic. I know this has been very tough for people, and I thank people for the way that they pulled together and followed the guidance. I know it's been particularly tough, as the honourable gentleman rightly says, for disabled people. But what we need to do, and that's why we've given huge quantities in support, as I said before, to the NHS and to vulnerable groups of all kinds. But the way forward now is to keep the virus under control, come out of the current measures on December the 2nd, and to allow our economy to start moving again, and to use testing and the prospect of a vaccination next year really to get the disease under control.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister is aware of the success we've seen across Scotland through city and region growth deals, and Moray is set to benefit from both the Scottish and the UK Government working together on our local deal. However, would my right honourable friend agree that the benefit to Moray could be even greater if the UK Government's contribution was spread over a shorter period than the current 15 years, say 10 or less? And would he agree with me that that would be something that would be very worthwhile, very beneficial, and would be welcomed by everyone involved in the Moray growth deal?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for this campaign. He's raised this idea with me before, and what I can say is while we'll certainly look at what he says, I'm very glad that we've signed the heads of terms on a Moray growth deal, delivering over £30 million of investment, and I thank him for the lobbying that he's been doing.
Let's head up to Liverpool with Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Professor Ian Sinner from Alderey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, West Derby, recently stated that the environment a child develops in, even before being born, can affect its DNA detrimentally by 10%. This government is responsible for creating an environment which is pushing millions of families into food poverty, which will be shaping this terrifying outcome. I asked the Prime Minister for the second time, will he work with me and other groups to put the right to food into law to address this?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right to raise the issue of food poverty and of poverty generally. That's why, in answer to the previous question from the honourable lady from Newcastle, I made the point that we have actually been successful through championing work, championing employment, in getting families out of poverty, large numbers of families out of poverty. And that is what we are going to do. And as he knows, we're putting another £170 million into supporting local councils throughout the winter, so that no child goes hungry this Christmas or over the winter season through any inattention from this government. But I'm grateful to him for raising the issue with me.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Prime Minister will know, the Scottish cashmere and whisky industries are being hammered by the tariffs being imposed by the United States as a result of the trade dispute with the European Union. Now, these tariffs are now doing serious harm to these iconic Scottish products, costing us jobs in the Scottish borders. So can the Prime Minister reassure me the Government is doing everything it possibly can to find a resolution to this dispute?
Well, my honourable friend is entirely right to raise that issue. It continues to be a cause of grave concern, and I raise it repeatedly with our American friends, and I'm working with my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, to reach a negotiated solution as fast as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A recent study of 18 million people in The Lancet shows that black, Asian and minority ethnic people are twice as likely as white people to catch coronavirus and more likely to go into intensive care. Lead researchers have suggested that structural inequalities and not genetics are the key differential. So how will the Prime Minister redress structural inequalities as the vaccine is rolled out?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a very important point, and we are thinking about this issue in government right now. As he knows, in response to the early data that we saw on about the impact on black and minority ethnic groups, we have brought forward enhanced testing procedures for particularly vulnerable groups, those who are exposed to a heavy viral load, perhaps in the course of their work. And there are other factors, as he knows, that at play in the prevalence of the disease amongst black and minority ethnic groups. I'm sure that the point he makes will be among the considerations that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation takes into account in the course of their deciding how to roll out the vaccine and where it should go first, because he's making an important point.
What I'd like to do is just put a big thank you on record to the broadcasting team for making today happen.
Yeah.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, and suspending the House for 3 minutes, order.